I was drinking my evening tea when my daughter-in-law leaned against the doorway, crossed her arms, and said, "You're lucky we let you stay." That sentence didn't just cut. It settled somewhere deep inside me, cold and deliberate, like someone placing a stone on my chest and waiting to see whether I'd break. At 74, you think you've already survived the worst life can throw at you. But there I was, being told, in my own house, that I should be grateful for being tolerated. I didn't answer her. I'd learned long ago that silence protects you better than any sharp word. Jessica smirked, as if my quiet meant agreement, and walked back toward the kitchen, her heels clicking across the hardwood my husband once sanded with his own hands. I sat still, listening, counting the clicks the way people count their breaths during pain. 14 steps. She always took 14. She liked the sound, said it made the place feel expensive. She never mentioned that everything around her was paid for long before she came into our lives. When the kettle clicked off, I didn't get up right away. My joints ached, but that wasn't what kept me sitting. It was the simple, bitter fact that it wasn't the first time she'd spoken to me that way. It was only the first time I'd finally heard her without turning away inside. "You're lucky we let you stay." As if I were a stray they'd kindly taken in. As if I didn't remember signing the property deed with my husband 43 years ago. As if I hadn't worked double shifts in a nursing home while raising my son alone during the years Richard traveled for work. But that's how it happens. Disrespect doesn't arrive with fanfare. It creeps in, settling quietly, until one day it speaks out loud and looks you straight in the face. I stood up slowly and carried my cup to the sink. The kitchen smelled of the expensive candles Jessica liked, something called cedar blossom, which to me smelled like burnt sugar and vinegar. My son wasn't home yet. He rarely was. His office kept him late, or that's what he said. I suspected staying longer at work was easier than coming back to a wife who needed someone to scold and a mother he didn't know how to defend. My bedroom, no. The room Jessica called the storage guest space was at the end of the hallway. She'd cleared just enough space for a narrow bed and a small dresser, leaving boxes stacked so close to the walls that sunlight came in through a slit, like in a basement cell. I'd moved in with hope, and I suppose that's the cruelest thing to lose at my age. You'd think widows stop hoping for softness, for welcome, but I still did. I still believed my son wanted me near. I sat on my bed, my back straight, my hands folded on my lap. The silence felt heavier tonight, not empty, but full of things I hadn't allowed myself to think. When Richard died, the house became too quiet, too big, too full of echoes. My son, Michael, said, "Mom, you shouldn't be alone. Move in with us. We'll take care of everything." I'd believed him, because he said it with the kind of tenderness he rarely showed as an adult. I thought maybe grief had softened him, made him remember who he was before ambition hardened him into someone formal and polite with his own mother. Everything had started gently. Jessica was polite at first, stiff but polite. She brought me tea. She asked if I needed more blankets. She even said she admired women of your generation. I didn't understand then that some people use compliments the same way they use bait. It changed slowly. A sigh when I asked a question, a comment about old habits, a laugh when I folded towels wrong. I started to shrink without noticing, the way cloth fades in sunlight. But tonight was different. Tonight, something in me, something thin and quiet, finally straightened, like an old tree refusing to bend again. I looked at the doorway, remembering the exact tilt of Jessica's chin when she said those words. I'd seen that look before in my years as a nurse. The look of someone who thinks power makes them taller. My house, her rules, my silence, her satisfaction. I closed my eyes, letting the truth settle. They didn't let me stay. I had allowed them to live as though this place belonged to them. I had made myself small so they wouldn't feel crowded in a house they hadn't earned. An old memory rose. My husband at the kitchen table, tapping the wood with his knuckle, telling me, "Ellie, never let anyone decide your worth, not even family." I hadn't listened, maybe because I wanted so much to belong again, to someone, somewhere. A floorboard creaked. Jessica walked by my door, talking loudly on the phone. Something about ordering takeout. Something about your mother-in-law hovering again. I wasn't hovering, I was breathing. It seemed that alone was too much for her. I opened my eyes. My hands weren't trembling. That surprised me. I felt calm, steady, as if the years of swallowing bitterness had condensed into one clear thought. This will not continue. Not because I wanted revenge, not because I wanted gratitude, but because I had finally remembered I was still a person, not a shadow in my own home. I used to think I understood loneliness. I thought it was the silence after my husband died, or the evenings when the house seemed to echo with everything that used to be. But real loneliness is when you live under the same roof with people who look at you as if you're already halfway gone. Loneliness with witnesses. That's the cruel kind. When Richard passed, the house felt like a museum of our life. His jacket still hung in the closet for months, as if he might return from the garage smelling of sawdust. I'd sit at the kitchen table tracing the scratches he'd left with his tools, feeling him in the wood. I slept poorly, ate badly, and moved through the days like a woman walking underwater. Grief slows everything, even the beating of the heart. Michael visited then, more often than usual. He'd come in his pressed shirts, his voice soft, controlled. "Mom, you shouldn't be alone," he told me shortly after the funeral. "Come stay with us, at least for a while." When he said it, something inside me unclenched, the way a tired hand opens after holding too tight for too long. He was my only child. I wanted to believe he meant it. Jessica didn't say much at the time. She hugged me stiffly at the funeral, her perfume sharp and sweet in my nose. She said, "We'll take care of you." But her eyes never quite met mine. I blamed her discomfort on grief. I blamed everything on grief. Grief makes excuses you wouldn't otherwise make. When they helped me move in, I tried to ease the transition. I didn't bring much, just a few boxes of clothes, photographs, my wedding china, and the blue Afghan I crocheted the year Michael was born. I thought Jessica would appreciate that I tried not to overwhelm their space. "We'll put your things in the guest room," Jessica said. But when we reached it, there were boxes stacked floor to ceiling. "We'll sort this out soon," she promised. Soon became later. Later became never. Eventually, they cleared a small corner, enough for a narrow bed and a dresser that wobbled if you pulled the drawer too fast. I didn't complain. Women of my generation rarely do. Our mothers taught us that gratitude was a kind of duty, like keeping the kitchen clean or remembering birthdays. So I thanked them, sincerely, even when a small ache bloomed inside me. The first week was almost pleasant. We ate dinners together. Michael asked how I was sleeping. Jessica bought me herbal tea to help with nerves. I told myself, see? They care. They're trying. Sometimes you believe a lie because the truth would break you. But things changed in ways so small, I almost missed them. It was Jessica asking me to wait to use the bathroom in the morning because the kids need a routine. It was the labels she placed on pantry shelves, family breakfast items, and mom's food, as though I were a tenant. It was her way of saying, Oh, let me handle that, and taking things out of my hands like I was a child. Whenever I washed dishes, she'd silently re-wash them later. When I folded laundry, she'd refold it with a sigh. "Don't worry, it's just how I like things," she'd say. But tone is its own language. The worst moment came a month in. I was sitting in the living room watching an old Western Richard used to love. Jessica walked in, glanced at the screen, and smiled tightly. "Oh," she said, "we don't usually use the living room in the evenings. The kids do their homework here." The kids were upstairs. The room was empty. But she stood there, waiting. I turned off the TV and stood up. "Of course," I said. I carried my tea to my room and sat on the bed, listening to the house continue on without me. Michael stopped checking on me as often. At first, he'd knock on my door each night, asking if I needed anything. Then it became every other night. Then it stopped. He came home later, kissed Jessica on the cheek, talked about work, and barely noticed me unless I was in the way. He talked to me the way people talk to cashiers. Polite, distant, already finished. I blamed work. Then I blamed exhaustion. Then I blamed myself. Old women are trained to feel responsible for their own invisibility. But the truth is simpler. When people decide you're a burden, every silence you offer becomes proof. I don't know exactly when Jessica stopped pretending. Maybe it was the day she asked me to contribute a fair share of the grocery bill, even though she bought things I couldn't pronounce. Maybe it was when she said, "Try not to leave your slippers in the hall. It makes the place look messy." Maybe it was when she told Michael, loudly enough for me to hear, "Your mother is always underfoot," though I had spent the entire day in my room. It didn't happen at once. It grew like mold in the corners, unnoticed until it had taken the whole wall. And the saddest part is this. I was so hungry for family that I kept telling myself it was normal, that adjusting takes time, that Jessica simply had her ways. I told myself that up until the night she said, "You're lucky we let you stay." That was the moment something settled, not broken, not fallen, but settled into clarity. Because sometimes it takes someone naming your place for you to see how small they've tried to make it. I used to think humiliation came in grand gestures, shouting, slammed doors, broken plates. But real humiliation is quiet. It lives in little corrections, in glances that last a second too long, in the way someone takes something out of your hands as if you're about to drop it. It's the kind of thing that, when you retell it, sounds too small to matter, unless you've lived through it day after day. It began with groceries. One afternoon, I came home from my short walk, my only walk most days, and found Jessica rearranging the kitchen cabinets. She didn't acknowledge me at first. She rarely did when she was in organizing mode, as she called it. I stood quietly, hands folded, watching her shift cereal boxes and jars of peanut butter like pieces on a chessboard. Finally, she turned, giving me a bright, polished smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, perfect timing, Ellen. I wanted to talk to you about food arrangements." I should have known then that nothing good ever follows a sentence like that. She opened a cabinet. The top two shelves were lined with bright boxes, organic snacks, children's granola bars, flavored sparkling water. "These," she said, tapping the wood, "are for the family." Then she pointed to the bottom shelf, almost at knee level, where she had placed a small basket with 2 cans of soup, crackers, and a jar of cheap pasta sauce I'd never seen before. "And this is where we'll keep your things." My things. Things I supposedly chose for myself, though she'd bought every single item without asking. I nodded, because nodding felt safer than asking questions. But she wasn't done. "I also think it's fair," she added, that you cover your portion of the groceries. You know, since you have a pension. A pension? Yes, a modest one. After 37 years working in a nursing home, lifting people twice my size, caring for strangers in ways my own family would later fail to do for me. I opened my mouth to answer, but she continued before I could breathe. Michael and I have a lot of expenses. The kids' extracurriculars, our mortgage, utilities. She waved a manicured hand. So we'll calculate your share weekly. Cash, preferably. I wanted to tell her that the mortgage she mentioned so casually wasn't even theirs. The house was mine and my husband's. They didn't have a mortgage. They only had bills they created with their taste for upgrades and luxuries. But I stayed silent. Silence was my shield then. A flimsy one, but the only one I had. A week later, the towels incident happened. I had washed a load of laundry and folded everything neatly on the dining table. When Jessica saw it, she sighed. A long, dramatic sigh that suggested I'd broken something expensive. "These towels," she said, holding one up delicately, "are folded wrong." I blinked. Wrong? She unfolded and refolded it sharply, creasing the edges with such force it looked painful. "They need to be in thirds, then halves, like this." She lined up the corners as if she were arranging fabric in a boutique. "When you fold them your way, the closet looks messy, and I have a system." A system. Jessica had more systems than a hospital ICU. I apologized, though I don't know why. Reflex, maybe. A lifetime of believing harmony was my responsibility. Over the next weeks, her corrections became routine. She corrected how I arranged plates in the dishwasher, how I swept the floor, how I watered the plants. Once, she stopped me mid-sentence during dinner, saying, "Could you not tell stories at the table? The kids get confused." The kids were 16 and 18. I doubt they were confused. Uncomfortable, perhaps, watching their grandmother be shushed like an old dog, but not confused. Then came the evening she moved my chair. There had always been a chair in the living room, soft gray fabric with a blanket draped over the back. It wasn't mine, but I liked to sit in it in the evenings, knitting or reading. It made me feel part of the household, not hidden away. One day I walked in and found it gone, not moved, gone. I stood there staring at the empty space, my hands cold, my heart thudding with that strange mix of surprise and shame that no one warns you about in old age. Jessica walked in behind me, holding a stack of mail. "Oh," she said lightly, "I moved the chair upstairs. It didn't make sense to keep it here." The kids wanted more space for their things. I looked at the wide, spotless living room. Not a toy, not a notebook, not a single thing out of place. "What things?" I asked quietly. She blinked, then smiled in that patient way she used on telemarketers. "You know how teenagers are. They need room, and you have your space." She gestured vaguely toward the hallway. "It's better this way." Better for whom? Certainly not for me. The space she mentioned barely fit my knees if I sat on the bed. From then on, the living room was no longer mine to enter. I could walk through it, yes, but I could feel Jessica watching me, measuring the seconds, silently asking, "Do you really need to be here?" I learned to stay in my room. I knitted there, I ate there, I prayed there. I cried there once, quietly, because Jessica was downstairs, and I didn't want her to hear the way my breath broke in my throat. And then, one afternoon, I made the mistake of sitting on the patio with a cup of tea. It was a warm day, a gentle breeze, the kind of weather Richard loved. I closed my eyes and let the sun warm my face. Jessica stepped outside, stopped short, and frowned. "Oh, you're out here," she said. We usually keep this area clean for guests, just so you know. Guests. I wasn't even that. I nodded, picking up my cup, and went inside. As I closed the door behind me, I felt something. A small, sharp snap inside, like a thread breaking. Sometimes it takes many small cuts to realize you're bleeding. Sometimes it takes months of shrinking before you realize you've disappeared. The worst part wasn't the chores or the comments. It was the way the house slowly rearranged itself around Jessica's needs, as if the walls bent to her voice. Places that were once open to me. Spaces where I breathed, relaxed, remembered that I was still a person. Became off limits in quiet, humiliating increments. I didn't even notice at first. That's the danger of soft cruelty. It whispers before it bites. It began with the living room, but the next loss was the one that stung deepest. The kitchen. Not the whole kitchen, of course. That would have been too obvious, even for Jessica. Instead, she carved out invisible rules. Please keep your tea things to one shelf. Try not to leave your cup in the drying rack. Don't use the oven when the kids are studying. The smell distracts them. Don't cook after 6. It makes the house feel busy. Busy. She said it with a little wrinkle of her nose, as if busy were something shameful. I used to run a house for decades, raising a son, working 12-hour shifts, washing uniforms by hand because our dryer broke every other month. Busy used to be life. Now busy was an offense. One evening, when Michael was late, again, I decided to bake cornbread. My husband loved it. My son grew up eating it. And the familiar rhythm of measuring, stirring, pouring soothed something tight in me. The smell filled the kitchen, warm and sweet, like home should smell. For 2 minutes, I felt almost like myself again. Jessica walked in, sniffed the air sharply, and froze. "Oh," she said, her voice flat. "You're cooking." I wiped my hands on a towel. "Just some cornbread. Michael always liked—" She cut me off with a small wave of her hand. "I know, but we're keeping the house low-cal right now, and the kids need consistency." She said consistency as if I'd introduced chaos into their lives by opening a bag of flour. "I'll put it away," I said quietly. "No." Her tone softened, but her eyes didn't. "We just need you to ask before you make things. We have a routine. It's important." Routine was her favorite word. Routine meant control. Control meant I disappeared a little more each day. I wrapped the cornbread in foil and brought it to my room. I ate a slice alone, the crumbly softness catching in my throat. Not because of dryness, but because loneliness has a way of coating everything, even food. The next shift came with the laundry. One morning, I went to start a load, only to find a new laminated sign taped to the washer. "Please do not use this machine without checking with us. It's delicate." Delicate. The machine was newer than my knees. It wasn't delicate, Jessica's ownership was. She guarded it the way cats guard sunbeams. I stood there, staring at the sign for a long time. It seemed absurd that a woman who'd nursed strangers through broken bones and strokes was being told she might break a washing machine. But absurdity becomes normal if you're fed it spoonful by spoonful. Later that week, I found the bathroom door locked. Jessica had bought one of those little sliding latches. For privacy, she claimed, though privacy had never been an issue before I moved in. When I knocked, she opened it just a crack. "Oh," she said. "Do you need something?" "I need to take a shower," I answered. She sighed. "Could it wait? The kids have their routine. Mornings are really tight." "It's 11, I said. "Yes, but they'll be home soon." They wouldn't. School didn't let out for hours. But she looked at me like someone tolerating a cranky customer, so I stepped aside and returned to my room. My world shrank to 4 walls and a thin window. Then came the moment, small, stupid. that finally peeled away my denial. I went to the hall closet to get my cardigan. When I opened the door, I saw that Jessica had rearranged everything, her coats in the middle, the kids' jackets on the left, a row of neatly labeled bins on the right. My cardigan wasn't there. "Jessica," I called. She appeared at the top of the stairs holding a laundry basket. "Yes?" "My sweater. It's not where it was." "Oh." She blinked. I moved it. "Your things were cluttering the space. Where did you put it?" My voice was calm, too calm. "In your room." She said room the way people say shed. "It's better if your belongings stay together. It keeps the house organized." Organized, routine, space, rules, family area, guest space, your things, our home. Words she used like fences. I thanked her, because that's what women like me do, and returned to my room, where I found the sweater folded on my bed like a consolation prize. That was the day I counted. I was no longer allowed in the living room. I was discouraged from using the patio. I needed permission for the washer. I needed to announce showers. The kitchen belonged to Jessica. The closet belonged to Jessica. The house belonged to Jessica. Except it didn't. Not by law, not by deed, not by a single signature or cent. It belonged to me. Every shingle, every window, every pipe my husband repaired with his own hands. I sat on the edge of my bed, the cardigan in my lap, and for the first time in months, I didn't cry. I didn't tremble. I didn't shrink. Instead, something old and steady rose inside me. Something shaped like dignity, sharpened by age, strengthened by decades of survival. Jessica thought I had no place here, but the truth was far simpler. She was the one whose place was borrowed, not me. I sat with that cardigan in my hands longer than a grown woman should sit, thinking about a sweater. But it wasn't the fabric that held me there. It was everything it represented. All the quiet ways I had let myself be moved, tucked away, packed into corners to make others comfortable. I could almost hear my husband's voice, warm and steady, the way it was when he wanted me to listen. "Ellie," he'd say, "a person who doesn't claim their space will someday lose it." I used to laugh and tell him he was dramatic. I used to think love meant yielding, bending, smoothing over rough edges. But maybe that was youth, the foolish kind. At 74, you see clearly what you ignored at 30. And what I saw now was that I had yielded myself into near invisibility. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay on my narrow bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the muffled rhythm of a house that no longer felt like mine. Michael's footsteps, Jessica's voice, a cupboard closing, laughter. Theirs, never mine. I pressed my hand against my chest and whispered, "Richard, I'm so tired." Not tired like needing sleep. Tired like being worn down by small humiliations that no one else sees. The next morning, I opened the drawer where I kept my husband's papers. I told myself I was only sorting, only organizing. But the truth was, I wanted to see something that still recognized me as the woman I once was, not the shadow I had become. Faded envelopes, old insurance forms, our marriage certificate, and beneath them all, in a plastic sleeve, the deed to the house, my name and Richard's printed side by side. I traced the letters with my finger, and something warm flickered inside my chest. Not anger. No. Something quieter and steadier. Memory. I remembered the day we bought this house. The way Richard had lifted me off my feet and spun me around in the empty living room. The smell of fresh paint. The first Christmas we celebrated here, with Michael toddling around in pajamas far too big for him. The nights Richard came home from the workshop, tired and smiling, asking, "Did you save me dinner?" And me pretending I hadn't been waiting up for him. This house wasn't four walls. It was the last place where I had been fully myself. I closed the folder slowly, deliberately, and placed it on the nightstand. My hands weren't shaking. They felt strangely sure, as if my bones themselves remembered something my mind had forgotten. That I had lived a long life, a hard life, and I had earned the right to inhabit my own home without asking permission. Around noon, I went to the kitchen to boil water for tea. Jessica was there, leaning against the counter, scrolling her phone. She didn't look up when I walked in. "That kettle is making the house smell like metal again," she murmured. "Could you try not to use it when the kids are around?" They weren't home. The house was silent except for her voice. I set the kettle down. "I'll use it anyway," I said quietly. She lifted her eyes, startled. Not offended. Startled, as if she'd just heard a chair speak. "What did you say?" "I said," I repeated, "I'll use it anyway." A small pause, the kind that stretches long enough to reveal who people really are. Jessica blinked, then laughed under her breath. "Well," she said, "everyone gets cranky at your age, I suppose." I didn't answer. I poured water into the kettle, turned it on, and waited. The click of the switch sounded louder than usual. As I stood there, I felt something shift inside me. Not a spark, not a flame, but a slow, rising warmth that spread through my chest like strength returning to a limb long numb. I wasn't done shrinking. I wasn't done yielding. But I had taken one step back toward myself, and that was enough to steady me. Later that evening, I returned to my room and placed the deed inside my handbag, along with my ID and the little notebook where I kept all my important numbers. My movements were calm, measured, like preparing for a journey I already knew the destination of. I didn't have a full plan yet, but I had a beginning, and sometimes at my age, a beginning is all you need. I woke the next morning before sunrise, the sky still a deep, bruised blue. My joints ached. They always did in the cold, but the ache felt almost purposeful, like my body reminding me that I'd survived worse things than Jessica's sharp tongue and Michael's silence. I sat on the edge of my narrow bed and looked at the handbag resting against the nightstand. Inside it lay the deed, my documents, and that little notebook with phone numbers I'd collected over decades. For the first time in months, I felt awake, not energized. That's a word for younger women. No, I felt present, as if I'd stepped back into myself. By 7 o'clock, the house began to stir. Jessica moved around the kitchen with her usual clipped efficiency, drawers opening and closing like punctuation marks. Michael left early, murmuring a quick, "Morning, Mom," without looking up from his phone. I didn't answer. I wasn't angry. I simply didn't have any words to give him. I waited until the house emptied, then slipped on my coat and stepped outside. The air was crisp, biting at my cheeks. I walked slowly, careful steps, deliberate steps, toward the bus stop. I hadn't taken a bus in years. Michael used to insist on driving me everywhere, but insisting ended the moment I became inconvenient. I reached the bus stop bench and sat down with a soft exhale. The neighborhood was quiet in that particular way mornings are. Newspaper bundles tied up, lawns still wet with dew, dogs barking in the distance. I felt strangely invisible, but in a good way this time. No one expected anything from me. No one was watching me. When the bus arrived, the driver lowered the step with a kind nod. "Take your time, ma'am." It had been a long time since someone spoke to me with simple courtesy. I got off in the old part of town, brick buildings, narrow streets, small shops with crooked signs. My destination was a little office on the corner, one I'd walked past 100 times with Richard, but never had a reason to enter. The sign read, Marlowe and Pierce, Family Law and Estate Planning. Inside, the lobby smelled faintly of paper and lemon polish. A young receptionist looked up, surprised. Not many people came in this early. "Good morning. Do you have an appointment?" "No," I said, "but I need one. Soon." She gave me a gentle smile. "Let me see who's available." 5 minutes later, I was seated across from a man in his late 50s with silver at his temples and kind eyes behind his glasses. His name was Daniel Pierce. He shook my hand firmly, as if he respected it. The kind of handshake you give someone you consider equal. "So, Mrs. Marsh," he said, opening a folder, "how can I help you today?" I didn't know where to begin. What does a woman say when she's been made small for so long? How do you explain a slow erosion of dignity? "I live with my son," I started. "And his wife." My voice sounded steadier than I felt. "Things at home have become difficult." Daniel didn't interrupt. He waited. "It's my house, legally, but I let them move in after my husband died. I thought it would help all of us." I paused, pressing my fingers together. "But I'm not treated as someone who belongs there. I'm treated as a nuisance." He nodded slowly, absorbing each word. "Mrs. Marsh, do you want to change the arrangement?" "Yes," I said. The answer came quicker than I expected. "I do." He leaned forward. "You have options. Strong ones. Especially since you own the property outright." I opened my handbag and pulled out the plastic sleeve containing the deed. His eyebrows rose slightly as he examined it. "Clear title," he said. "Your name alone now since your husband listed you as surviving owner." He pushed the document gently back toward me, as if handing me something precious. Something I had forgotten was mine. "What would you like to do?" I looked down at my hands. They were wrinkled, veined, the hands of a woman who had worked hard, hands that had wiped fevers, kneaded bread, stitched torn shirts, held a dying husband's fingers until they went cold. These hands had earned more respect than they'd gotten. "I want to make sure," I said slowly, "that if people choose not to treat me like family, they don't get to live like they own my home." Daniel nodded once, firmly. "We can prepare an eviction notice. Legal, precise, without room for argument." I felt something deep inside me shift. Not guilt, not fear. Relief. A quiet, dignified relief that softened my shoulders and steadied my breath. "It won't be easy," he warned gently. "Emotionally, I mean." "Nothing about these last months has been easy," I replied. "At least this way, I'll be taking a step toward myself." He smiled. "I'll draft the notice. Once you sign, we'll proceed formally. It will be completely lawful. Completely lawful. Completely justified. Completely mine to decide." When I stepped back outside, the sun had risen higher, warming the pavement. I stood there for a moment, feeling the breeze lift the ends of my scarf. I wasn't trembling. I wasn't doubting. I wasn't afraid. For the first time in a long time, I felt like a woman who remembered her own worth. I turned toward the bus stop, my bag heavier with papers, but my heart lighter than it had been in months. I was going home. But not as the same woman who had left it. The bus dropped me off 2 streets from the house so Jessica wouldn't see me through the window. I walked slowly, the papers in my bag shifting with each step, like a quiet reminder of the decision I had made. I kept touching the zipper, making sure everything was still there. The deed, the consultation notes, Daniel Pierce's business card, and the first draft of the eviction notice he'd prepared for me to review. I wasn't ready to serve it yet, but I was ready to stop pretending nothing was wrong. When I entered the house, Jessica was in the kitchen with a plate of toast crumbs in front of her. She glanced up, her smile stiff. "Oh, you went out early." Her tone suggested I should have asked permission. "I did," I replied simply. She waited, expecting explanation. Where I'd gone, why, with whom. When none came, her eyebrows twitched, that small sign of irritation she thought she hid well. "Well," she said finally, "next time, just let me know. We weren't sure if we needed to adjust breakfast." Adjust breakfast? For a 74-year-old woman? As if I were a school child whose absence needed marking. I hung my coat without answering. Let her sit with the silence for once. Later, when I returned to my room, I locked the door, something I rarely did. I spread the documents across the bed. The eviction notice was simple, sterile, legally sound. Seeing my name printed at the bottom, Ellen Marsh, legal property owner, stirred something inside me. Recognition, maybe, or remembrance. But I still needed to be sure the house was truly mine in every sense the law required. Property can be tricky. Sometimes the past holds surprises. So I spent the afternoon digging through my husband's old files, reading each page slowly, making notes in my little notebook. Tax records, insurance policies, a mortgage statement stamped paid in full 12 years ago. Every document confirmed what Daniel had said. The house belonged solely to me. No loopholes, no shared ownership, no technicalities Jessica could wave around. Still, old habits die slowly. A part of me kept thinking, but will Michael understand? Will he forgive me? Will this break us forever? Then another thought followed, softer but sharper. What exactly is there left to break? Our relationship had been dying in inches long before Jessica came into the picture. Her cruelty only accelerated what neglect had already begun. A few hours later, I heard the garage door open. Michael. I tucked the documents back into my bag, zipped it, and placed it gently beneath my bed. Not out of fear. Just not yet. I wanted to prepare myself fully before revealing the truth. He knocked on my door a few minutes later. "Mom? Dinner's almost ready." Dinner. He rarely invited me anymore. Jessica must have insisted. She liked controlled civility when guests or neighbors might notice distance. I opened the door. Michael smiled, but it was the economical smile he'd perfected as an adult. Polite, thin, efficient. "You okay?" he asked. "You were out this morning." "I'm fine," I answered. He waited for an explanation. I didn't give one. He cleared his throat awkwardly. "Well, good." And he walked away. At dinner, Jessica spoke about school schedules, grocery lists, and something about reorganizing the pantry to prevent clutter. She avoided my eyes the entire time. Michael nodded at everything she said, a habit he'd developed that made me ache for the little boy he used to be, the child who once defended me in a grocery store when someone cut in front of me. Now I was the one he let stand behind everyone else. After the meal, Jessica stacked plates into my hands without asking. "Could you rinse these? I need to help the kids with homework." I rinsed them silently, feeling the familiar mix of hurt and resentment rise in my chest. But it no longer paralyzed me. It clarified me. Later that night, in the quiet of my room, I reopened Daniel's folder. His handwriting was neat and steady. "You have the right to reclaim your home. You have the right to safety. You have the right to dignity." I traced the words with my fingertip. I whispered them out loud, and I felt my spine straighten, inch by inch. Tomorrow, I would meet Daniel again to finalize the notice. Tomorrow, the process would begin. Tonight, I lay down on my narrow bed with one certainty. I had finally stopped waiting for them to change. I was the one changing now. Michael left for work early the next morning, his footsteps quick, his briefcase snapping shut like a period at the end of a sentence he didn't want to discuss. Jessica stayed behind, drifting around the kitchen with the restless energy of someone who needed to control every square inch of the house to feel important. I watched her for a moment from the hallway, the stiff posture, the clipped movements, the way she wiped an already clean counter as if daring a speck of dust to challenge her authority. She didn't see me there. Or maybe she did and chose not to acknowledge it. Either way, I felt strangely detached, like I was studying a stranger in a place she mistook for her own. By 9, she left to run errands, and I was alone again. That was my window. I slipped my handbag over my arm, checked for the documents one more time, deed, consultation notes, eviction draft, and stepped outside. My walk to the bus stop was slower today. The cold wind bit through my coat, and my knees complained with every step. But I didn't turn back. A lifetime of lifting patience, raising a child alone, burying a husband. The body remembers how to move through pain when the mind is determined. At the law office, Daniel greeted me with the same warm steadiness. "Mrs. Marsh," he said, "come in. I've finalized everything." He handed me the papers, each one crisp, precise, without a crack for Jessica's arguments to crawl through. Formal notice of eviction. 30 days. Legal basis clearly stated. My signature line waiting at the bottom, like the first step across a bridge. I read every line slowly. When I finished, Daniel looked at me carefully. "This will change things," he said. "There's no gentle way to do it." "I'm not looking for gentle," I replied. "Just for what's right." He nodded. "Then sign." My hand didn't shake as I wrote my name. It surprised me. I thought I'd feel fear or guilt or the ache of loss. Instead, what I felt was alignment, as if my bones had finally settled where they'd been meant to be all along. When I left the office, the wind had softened. My steps on the pavement felt lighter. I wasn't done, far from it, but the heaviest part, the deciding, was behind me. On the bus ride home, I watched the familiar streets slide by. The bakery Richard loved. The pharmacy where Michael used to buy candy with coins from my purse. The church with the chipped white steeple where we'd once spent Christmas Eve together as a family. So many places that held memories of a life I'd built with love. Not money, not revenge, not bitterness. Love. I wasn't evicting memories. I was evicting disrespect. When I stepped back into the house, Jessica was sitting on the sofa scrolling through her phone. She didn't greet me, just looked up long enough to ask, "Where were you?" Her tone was sharp, possessive, as if my movements required her approval. "I had an appointment," I said. "With who?" "A professional." I watched her eyes narrow, calculation flickering behind them. She was searching for something to scold, something to claim, something to reclaim control. But I didn't give her details. I didn't owe her explanations. She stood, crossing her arms. "Next time, let me know before you leave. The kids—" "I don't need permission to step outside," I said quietly. The words startled her. She blinked, actually blinked, as if I'd spoken in a language she didn't recognize. She wasn't used to this tone from me, calm, steady, unbending. "What's gotten into you lately?" she snapped. "You're acting strange." "I'm acting like myself," I said, and walked past her. I felt her eyes burning into my back, but I didn't turn around. I went to my room, closed the door, and placed the signed documents in the drawer. I didn't hide them. I simply put them where they belonged until the right moment. That night, at dinner, the tension hovered like smoke above the table. Michael kept glancing at me, puzzled by something he couldn't name. Jessica kept her lips pressed in a thin line, as if holding back questions she wasn't brave enough to ask. I didn't speak much. I didn't need to. When you stop shrinking, the room feels it, even if no one mentions it. After the dishes were cleared, Jessica cornered Michael in the hallway. I couldn't hear the words, but I saw the hissing anger in her gestures, the frantic movement of her hands. She kept pointing toward my room. I smiled faintly, closing my door. They felt something shifting. They just didn't know what yet. But soon they would. Very soon. I didn't sleep much that night. Not because of fear. Fear had finally loosened its hold on me. But because my mind felt alive in a way it hadn't in years. I lay in the dark listening to the quiet hum of the house, my house, and thought about every step that had brought me here, every small humiliation, every whispered correction, every moment I'd chosen silence when I should have chosen myself. By dawn, I knew exactly what had to be done. I sat at my little desk, really just an old nightstand pushed against the wall, and opened the drawer where I'd placed the signed eviction notice. The papers lay there smooth and heavy, a physical reminder of the line I'd finally drawn. I touched the corner of the top sheet, the way one touches something sacred. It wasn't the paper that mattered. It was everything it stood for. A lifetime of work, sweat, sacrifice, and love that had built a home I had allowed others to treat like theirs. Not anymore. I spent the next hours preparing everything. Slowly. Methodically. The way I used to prepare medications at the nursing home, double-checking each bottle, each chart. I wanted no mistakes. I scanned the deed again. I reread the tenant law Daniel had printed for me. I wrote down the exact timeline Jessica and Michael would be given. I even checked the fire safe under my bed for the original documents Richard and I had kept locked away for decades. Everything was in order. Around noon, Jessica knocked on my door without waiting for a response and stepped inside. "You didn't come down for breakfast," she said. "Is something wrong?" Her tone wasn't kind. It was suspicious, as if my absence inconvenienced her. "I wasn't hungry," I replied. Her eyes narrowed. "You've been off, distant, secretive." Secretive. The irony almost made me laugh. "I'm fine," I said, and turned back to my papers. She didn't like that. Her voice sharpened. "Well, if you're planning something, I hope it won't disrupt the household." I looked up at her, and for the first time, I saw that she was uneasy. Truly uneasy. Predators sense when the prey stops being prey, even if they don't know the reason. Before she could ask more questions, the front door opened and closed. Michael came home early. "Mom?" he called from downstairs. "Can we talk?" I joined him in the kitchen. He was pacing, his tie askew, the stress already clinging to him like static. "Jessica says you've been acting strange," he started. "She's worried." Jessica hovered behind him, arms crossed, chin lifted, like a queen protecting her throne. "I'm not acting strange," I said. "I'm acting aware." Michael frowned. "Aware of what?" I didn't answer. Not yet. He sighed, rubbing his forehead. "Look, Mom, we're all trying our best here. Jessica manages the house. I'm juggling work. The kids are stressed. We just need things calm." Calm. A word people use when they want you quiet. Jessica stepped forward. "It would help if you didn't wander off without telling anyone, and if you respected the routines. And..." I raised a hand gently, and she froze, mid-sentence. "You'll both know everything soon," I said. Michael blinked. "What does that mean?" But I didn't elaborate. I simply walked past them, feeling their confusion trail after me like smoke. I spent the rest of the day reviewing each document again. Not out of doubt, out of discipline. When you're an older woman, people expect confusion, mistakes, forgetfulness. I wanted to give them nothing to question, nothing to twist. By evening, I had everything in a neat folder labeled with my name. I placed it on the nightstand, its weight steady and certain. As night crept in, the house grew quiet again. I sat on the edge of my bed, hands folded in my lap, staring at the folder. Tomorrow would be the beginning of the end, not of my life, but of the life they'd built using me as the foundation. Tomorrow, I would serve the eviction notice, not out of anger, not out of revenge, out of the simple truth that I had earned dignity, and I would not die in a corner of my own home. I turned off the lamp, but my eyes stayed open in the dark, steady and unafraid. I wasn't waiting anymore. I was ready. I woke before everyone else, as I often did. Years of early nursing shifts had trained my body to rise with the first hint of light, no matter how poorly I slept. But this morning felt different. I sat up slowly, letting the cold air settle around me like a reminder of where I was, and where I no longer intended to remain, at least not like this. The folder on my nightstand seemed to glow faintly in the dim light. The eviction notice rested inside, perfect and sharp as a scalpel. Today wasn't the day I became cruel. Today was the day I stopped allowing cruelty to nest in my silence. Downstairs, I heard Jessica. She moved with her usual pointed urgency, drawers opening too hard, cabinet doors shutting too loudly, like she wanted the house to feel her presence before she spoke a word. I didn't rush. I dressed calmly, brushed my hair, and buttoned my cardigan as if preparing for a quiet visit, not a quiet war. When I reached the bottom of the stairs, Jessica was loading the dishwasher. She didn't turn around. "There you are," she said. "I need the washer today, so please avoid starting any loads. Also, I'd appreciate it if—" "I won't be using the washer," I said gently. The tone made her pause. She straightened, still not looking at me. Good. Consistency helps the household run smoothly. I took my time stepping closer. The sun had begun creeping across the kitchen tiles, catching the gold in the faucet, the edge of her bracelet, the trembling line in my own fingers that stopped trembling the moment I curled them into a fist. Jessica turned then, mug in hand. "You seem off. Again. If you're upset about something, just say it. Passive-aggressive behavior is—" "Jessica," I interrupted softly, "I'll speak when Michael is present." Her face twitched. "Why? What's going on?" "You'll hear it once, and you'll hear it together." For the first time since I'd met her, she hesitated. Not dramatically, but a small, instinctive step back, the kind people take when they realize a dog they thought was sleeping has opened its eyes. Michael came home unexpectedly around 11. Jessica must have called him the moment I walked out of the room, her voice pitched in that urgent tone she used when the world didn't bend exactly the way she said it. He walked in, tense, scanning the room. "Mom, Jess said you needed to talk." I pointed to the dining table. "Sit, both of you." Jessica looked offended. Michael looked confused, but they sat. I placed the folder on the table. My fingers felt steady. My breath, slow. My heart, certain. Michael frowned. "Mom? What is this?" I opened the folder and slid 2 copies toward them. Jessica picked hers up first. Her lips parted, then froze. Her eyes darted across the page, faster and faster, as understanding, real, thick, impossible to soften understanding, filled her face. Michael's reaction was slower. He read each line carefully, confusion bleeding into disbelief, then something harder. Finally, he looked up. "Eviction?" His voice cracked. "Mom, what?" What is this? Jessica slammed her copy onto the table. Is this a joke? It has to be. This is insane. I stayed silent until the echoes of her outburst died. This is a legal notice, I said calmly. Prepared by an attorney, served today. Jessica's voice sharpened to a blade. You can't just kick us out. Yes, I can, I said. This is my home. My name is on the deed. I invited you to live here after Richard passed, hoping for family. Instead, I exhaled slowly. I've been treated like an intruder in my own life. Michael stared at me, stunned. Mom, we never. You did, I said quietly. Maybe not with malice, but with neglect, with entitlement, with indifference. I became a burden to manage, not a mother to respect. He opened his mouth, then closed it. Jessica's eyes glittered with something between fury and panic. This is unfair, she snapped. Where are we supposed to go? You have 30 days, I said. By law, you'll manage. This is revenge, she hissed. No, I answered. This is dignity. The room fell silent. Even the refrigerator hum felt momentarily subdued, as if the house itself was listening. Jessica rose abruptly, her chair scraping the floor. Michael, say something. Tell her she can't do this. Michael looked at his wife, then at me. His face had softened, not with tenderness, but with the weight of the truth he could no longer avoid. Jessica, he said slowly, she can. I didn't celebrate. I didn't gloat. I simply collected the empty folder and stood. I'll be in my room, I said. You can shout if you need to, but it won't change the outcome. I walked away on steady feet, feeling their stunned silence filling the space behind me. Not triumph, not spite. Just a long-awaited exhale, the first breath I'd taken freely in months. I closed my door gently, not to hide from the storm brewing outside, but because I no longer needed to witness it. Their voices rose almost immediately, Jessica's sharp, frantic, disbelieving, Michael's lower, tired, shaken. I sat on my bed, hands folded in my lap, listening without listening. I didn't need to hear every word. I'd lived inside those tones for months. After a while, the house went very quiet. Too quiet, the kind that falls when people run out of excuses. A soft knock came at my door. Mom? Michael's voice, thin, unsteady. Can I come in? I opened it and stepped aside. He stood there looking smaller than I remembered. Not physically. He was still the same broad-shouldered man, but something in him had collapsed inward. His tie was askew, his hair disheveled from running a hand through it too many times. Why? Why didn't you say anything sooner? He asked. I sat on the edge of the bed. I did, Michael, many times. You just weren't listening. He swallowed. Jess said you were overreacting. She told me you preferred being in your room, that you needed quiet. Quiet, I repeated softly. Yes, quiet is all I had left. He winced. I didn't want to hurt him, despite everything. I didn't want revenge. I wanted him to see, truly see, what had been happening right in front of him. He sat beside me, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor. I thought we were helping you, taking care of you. You thought, I said gently, that care meant control, that I was someone to be managed. His shoulders tensed. I didn't mean to make you feel. I know, I interrupted. I know you didn't mean harm, but harm doesn't need intention, Michael. Neglect grows quietly. He rubbed his face with both hands. Eviction? Mom, isn't that too far? I looked at him steadily. Too far was when I no longer had a place to sit in my own living room. Too far was when I needed permission to use my kitchen. Too far was when your wife told me I was lucky to be allowed to stay. His eyes widened a fraction. She said that? She did. Silence. Heavy, sinking silence. "I didn't know," he whispered. "You didn't want to know," I replied, "and I stopped expecting you to." He opened his mouth, closed it again, then said the only thing left. "What do you want from me?" I shook my head. "Nothing. I'm not asking for apologies or grand gestures. I'm giving you both the chance to build a home shaped by your own choices. Not mine, not my sacrifices. Yours." He looked at me then, really looked, maybe for the first time since I moved in. His eyes glistened, not with anger, but with something sadder. Recognition. "I failed you," he said quietly. "You forgot me," I corrected. "But you can remember again. Just elsewhere." He nodded slowly, absorbing the truth not as accusation, but as consequence. A sound broke the moment. A muffled sob from the hallway. The door was cracked open. Jessica stood there with a tissue clutched in one hand, eyes red and furious. "So that's it?" she snapped. "You're enjoying this, making us grovel." I turned toward her, my voice calm. "No, Jessica. I'm not enjoying anything. I'm reclaiming my life." "You could have talked to me," she cried. "You could have tried." "I did," I said simply, "but you don't listen to people you don't respect." Her lips trembled. For a moment, I saw fear, not of losing this house, but of losing control. Michael stood, rubbing her back awkwardly. "Jess, we should start packing." She jerked away from him. "No, I'm not leaving because she decided—" I raised a hand, not harshly, just firmly enough to stop her words. "This isn't punishment. It's boundaries." She glared at me, then at Michael, then stormed down the hall. A bedroom door slammed. Michael sighed and sank into the chair by my small desk. 30 days, he murmured. "We'll manage." "You will," I said. "You're capable, but not here. Not at my expense." He sat there a long moment, then reached out, placing his hand over mine. It was the first time in months he'd touched me. "I'm sorry," he whispered. I held his hand gently, without bitterness, without triumph. "I know." He stood, nodded once, and left quietly, closing the door behind him. For the first time since moving into this house, I felt the air shift. Not in my favor, but back to its rightful balance. They finally understood. Not the whole truth yet, perhaps, but enough. And sometimes enough is the beginning of healing, even if that healing happens in separate homes. The house felt different after that conversation with Michael. Not calmer, not kinder, but hollow, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Jessica moved around like a storm cloud, silent 1 minute, hissing the next. Every door she touched closed harder than needed. Every drawer snapped. At dinner, she banged pots and pans as if volume could rewrite legality. I stayed out of her way, not out of fear, but out of clarity. I no longer belonged in the middle of their chaos. I had stepped out of it the moment I served that notice. But Jessica wasn't done. Late that evening, I heard quick steps coming down the hall. Then a knock, firm, angry, impatient. Before I could answer, Jessica pushed my door open. She didn't even try to disguise the fury on her face. "We need to talk," she said. I folded the page of the book I'd been pretending to read. "Go ahead." She closed the door behind her, not gently, and crossed her arms tightly over her chest. "You blindsided us," she said. "Humiliated us. Michael is devastated." I shook my head. "No, Michael is waking up." She flinched, as if I'd slapped her. "You think you're so noble," she spat. "So wise. A victim of the evil daughter-in-law. But you've been judging me since the day you walked in here." "Jessica," I said quietly, "I didn't judge you. I endured you." Her breath caught. Her mouth opened, then closed again. "You're doing this because you're old and lonely," she said finally. "You can't stand not being the center of everything." I felt the sting of that, but not the way she intended. It hit not as insult, but as proof. Proof of how little she understood me, or family, or grief. "I'm doing this," I replied, "because you treated me like furniture you didn't like but couldn't throw away. Because you decided my space, my time, my voice were inconveniences." She paced then, restless, wringing her hands in a way I'd never seen. "We're a family," she blurted. "Families don't evict each other." "Families don't isolate their elders," I said. "They don't make them eat separate food. They don't take away their seats. They don't make them ask permission to use their own home." Jessica stopped pacing. She pressed her fingertips to her temples. "You're going to ruin everything," she whispered. "The kids. Michael. Our future." "No," I said softly. "I'm freeing everything, including you." Her head snapped up. "What is that supposed to mean?" "You've wanted control more than family for a long time," I said. "Now you'll have complete control of your own house, not mine. Your own space, your own rules. No one to challenge you." She looked at me with something unfamiliar. Fear, yes, but beneath it, something like recognition. A truth she couldn't deny. "You think you're helping us?" she asked, voice breaking. "Helping him?" "I'm helping myself," I said simply. "And that's something I haven't done in a long time." For a moment her face twisted, not in anger, but in something raw, a crack in the armor. I saw a woman who had built her life on control, because she feared what lived underneath it. Uncertainty, inadequacy, the terror of not being enough. But compassion is not the same as permission. She stepped closer, her voice low and trembling. "If you do this, if you really make us leave, Michael will resent you forever." I met her eyes calmly. "Michael will understand one day, maybe not now, but life teaches gently only when we listen early, and harshly when we don't." She swallowed hard. "You're choosing to be alone." "I'm choosing to live," I corrected. "There's a difference." Jessica stared at me, searching for a crack, a weakness, something she could use the way she'd used every silence, every apology, every kindness I'd offered. But there was nothing left for her to take. Finally, she exhaled sharply, turned on her heel, and left my room without another word. I sat there for a long time afterward, the air still vibrating from the force of her anger. But there was no fear in me, no doubt, just a quiet ache, the kind you feel when something long overdue finally arrives. In the distance, I heard Michael's voice, soft and unsure, asking Jessica what had happened. Her answer was muffled, frantic, angry. His was tired, subdued. I closed my eyes and let their voices fade. They weren't mine to carry anymore. This house, this life, this dignity, they were mine to reclaim, and I had already begun. The morning of their departure came quiet, heavy, almost colorless. No shouting, no slammed doors, none of Jessica's sharp-edged movements. Just the low murmur of boxes being carried down the stairs, the rustle of packing tape, the dull thump of things being set on the porch. The house felt like it was exhaling after holding its breath too long. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, hands wrapped around the warmth. I didn't hide away in my room. Not today. This was my home. I would inhabit it fully, even as they prepared to leave the space they had tried to shrink me out of. Jessica passed through the kitchen twice without looking at me. On the third pass, her eyes flicked to my cup, then to my face, then away again. She looked tired, older than she had any right to at her age. Control slipping from her fingers had aged her more than any hardship. Michael came in next. He hovered near the doorway, the way children do when they need permission to approach. "Mom?" he said softly. "We're almost done loading the car." I nodded and took a sip of tea. He came closer. "Is there anything you need before we go?" I looked at him. Really looked. He seemed smaller now, not in stature, but in certainty. His shoulders were rounded, his gaze unsteady, like a man who'd just realized he'd been asleep for years and woke in a room he didn't recognize. "No," I said gently. "I don't need anything." Silence stretched, not hostile, just weighted with all the things we hadn't said over the years. He cleared his throat. "The kids wanted to say goodbye." "They can," I answered. "If they wish." A moment later, they shuffled in. Two teenagers torn between embarrassment and sincerity. They hugged me awkwardly, murmured soft goodbyes, confusion flickering in their expressions. Children feel tension long before they understand it. Jessica stayed outside on the porch, arms crossed tightly, chin lifted in a defiant angle that fooled no one. She wasn't angry anymore. Not in the blazing way she'd been before. Now she was brittle, worn thin, like a rope frayed too many times. I stepped out onto the porch. The air was cool, the sky pale. She didn't turn to face me. After a long moment, she said, "I suppose this is what you wanted." "No," I replied quietly. "This is what I needed." She exhaled sharply. "You think I'm a monster." "No," I said. "I think you were overwhelmed, and instead of asking for help, you tried to control everything around you, including me." Her jaw tightened. "You make it sound gentle." "It wasn't gentle," I said, "but it was human." She turned then, her eyes red. "You could have tried to talk to me." "I did," I answered. "You didn't hear me. When someone has already decided who you are, your words reach closed doors." Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them back with force. Jessica didn't like being vulnerable. It left too much exposed. Still, something in her face softened, even just for a heartbeat. "You're stronger than I expected," she murmured. "I was stronger than I allowed myself to be," I corrected. She nodded, just once, a gesture small enough to ignore but significant enough to remember. Then she walked to the car without another word. Michael lingered. He looked at the house, then at me. Regret flickered across his face. Quiet. Heavy. Honest. "I never wanted it to be like this," he whispered. "I know. I wish I had seen what was happening. I wish you had too." I touched his hand gently. "But wishing doesn't change the truth. Only choices do. Now you get to make your own." He swallowed, eyes shining. "Will you be okay?" The question surprised me, not because he asked it, but because I heard no doubt in myself when I answered, "Yes, I will." He nodded, shoulders trembling slightly, then leaned in and hugged me. Not the polite, quick hugs he'd given for months. A real one, warm, unsure, trying to mend something without knowing how. When he stepped back, he looked younger again, vulnerable, human. "Call me," he said. "Please." "I will," I promised. "But not today." He understood. He got into the car. The engine started. I watched them pull away, slow at first, then turning the corner out of sight. I stood on the porch long after the car disappeared. The house behind me was still, open, breathing again. Empty rooms, quiet halls. My home. Finally, mine again. Not a victory, not vengeance, just space. Real, living space, enough to let myself exist fully again. The house was so quiet that first evening, I could hear the clock in the hallway ticking. A sound I hadn't noticed in months. Maybe it had been ticking all along, but silence has its own way of returning, only when you stop living inside someone else's noise. I walked through the rooms slowly, not out of frailty, but out of reverence. Grief and peace often wear the same face when they arrive together. The living room was first. Jessica had kept it museum clean, but somehow lifeless. Lamps unplugged, curtains always drawn the same precise way, pillows arranged like soldiers who feared reprimand. I ran my fingers across the back of the sofa, smoothing the fabric. It felt softer without her rules wrapped around it. I opened the curtains wide. Light spilled in like a long-forgotten guest. Next was the kitchen, the place that had become the sharpest symbol of my erasure. I stood there a long moment, remembering all the times I'd been corrected, monitored, restricted. Don't use this. Don't cook that. Your things go here. 1,000 tiny cuts that had taught me to shrink inside what used to be my pride. But now it was just a kitchen again. I filled the kettle and set it on the stove. No one told me it was too loud. No one told me to stop. The boil sounded like applause. While the tea steeped, I pulled out my old cast-iron skillet, the one Richard bought me on our 10th anniversary because he said every good home needed a pan that could outlive its owners. I wiped the dust from the handle and set it on the counter. I wasn't hungry, not really, but cooking for myself again felt like reclaiming a language I'd forgotten how to speak. I sautéed onions, listening to the slow hiss as they softened. The smell rose through the air, filling the kitchen with something warm and ordinary. For months, I'd been made to believe that my presence cluttered the home. But standing there, stirring a simple meal, the truth felt unmistakably clear. The house had missed me. After eating, I opened the hallway closet, the one Jessica organized as if defending territory. I found my cardigan on the highest shelf, folded as if placed there reluctantly. I pulled it down, shook it out, and hung it on a hook near the door, exactly where I wanted it. Such a small act. But power often returns to us in small gestures long before it announces itself fully. Then I went upstairs to the room they'd called the guest space. Boxes were scattered everywhere, left behind in their rush. I stood in the doorway, looking at the narrow bed, the cramped corners, the window blocked by storage bins. I remembered the first night I slept there, too polite to say aloud that the room made me feel like a forgotten suitcase. Then the nights after, when I cried silently, wishing for just one gentle moment in a house that should have been sanctuary. I felt no anger now, only a quiet sadness for the woman I had allowed myself to become. I began taking the boxes out, one by one. It took time. My knees protested, my hands ached, but I wasn't in a hurry. Each box I moved felt like digging through sediment, uncovering something buried. Underneath the clutter, I found the little wooden table Richard built for me decades ago. The legs were scratched, the varnish worn, but seeing it again brought a warmth to my chest that almost toppled me. I moved the table into the living room. Not the dining room, not a dusty corner, but by the big window. I placed a plant on it. One Jessica always said shed too many leaves. I didn't care. I liked the leaves. Then I retrieved the blue afghan I'd crocheted the year Michael was born. I draped it over the arm of my favorite chair, the chair Jessica had moved upstairs without asking. I'd carried it down earlier, step by cautious step. It belonged here. I belonged here. As the sun set, the house looked different, not younger. Houses never truly look young again, but softer, warmer, as if settling into a shape it recognized. I made one final cup of tea and sat in the chair. My chair, the afghan across my lap, the plant beside me, shedding leaves freely, exactly as it pleased. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't waiting for anything to happen. Not waiting for footsteps. Not waiting for permission. Not waiting to be included. Not waiting to be dismissed. Just sitting. Living. Breathing. The loneliness I'd feared didn't come. Instead, something else arrived. Something quieter. Sturdier. Peace. A peace born not of being alone, but of being myself again. The house didn't feel empty. It felt honest. And I finally felt at home. I woke before sunrise again, but the quiet felt different now. Not heavy, not watchful, just quiet. The kind of stillness a home has when it is no longer holding its breath for someone else's moods. I made tea and carried it to the living room. The morning light spilled across the wooden floor, brushing the Afghan on my lap, warming the chair beneath me. My chair. My home. There was no one to correct me. No one to hurry me. No one to diminish the simple fact of my existence. For a long time, I just sat there, letting the warmth settle into my bones. 74 years is enough time to collect a lifetime of pain, but it is also enough time to learn that pain doesn't have to be the last word. The doorbell rang around 9. A small, hesitant sound. I knew it wasn't Jessica. She never knocked like someone unsure of her welcome. When I opened the door, it was Michael. He stood there with his hands in his pockets, shoulders hunched, hair uncombed. He looked like a boy again. The same boy who once cried when he dropped his ice cream cone at the county fair. The same boy who used to bring me dandelions from the yard as if they were roses. "Mom," he said quietly. "Can I come in?" Of course. He stepped inside and looked around, slowly, as if seeing the house differently for the first time. His eyes lingered on the table Richard built, the Afghan on the chair, the open curtains, the plant dropping a leaf with theatrical timing. A faint smile pulled at the corner of his mouth. "It feels warm," he said. "I didn't realize it hadn't felt that way." I sat down, and he sat across from me, elbows on his knees the way he always did when he was searching for the right words. "I want to understand," he said finally. "I want to be better." I nodded, because wanting is the first step, but not the last. "You weren't cruel," I said softly. "You were absent. And sometimes absence hurts as sharply as any blow." He swallowed. "I'm sorry." "I know," I said. "And I forgive you. But forgiveness doesn't undo what happened. It doesn't change what I need." He looked around again, his throat tight. "You want to live alone." "I want to live with dignity," I replied. "And right now, that means living here, by myself, until I feel whole again." He nodded slowly, accepting it not as punishment, but as truth. Before he left, he hugged me. Not a quick, polite hug, but a real one. One that said he finally understood the weight I'd been carrying. He pulled back, wiping his eyes. "I'll call you," he said, "and I'll listen this time." When he walked away, I didn't feel abandoned. I felt rooted. I closed the door gently and returned to my chair. The house felt settled, not empty, simply mine. My breath, my rhythm, my pace filling the rooms again. I picked up my knitting, the yarn soft between my fingers. Outside, a bird sang, a thin, bright sound threading through the morning air. I let it carry me forward into whatever days were still left for me. Not waiting, not shrinking, not apologizing, living. Because age does not make us invisible. Silence does. And I had finally stepped out of the quiet that was killing me. If someone out there is living small in a place they once called home, I hope they find their voice sooner than I found mine. And if this story reached you, well, maybe that's your sign to stand a little taller today.